I want to apologize in advance for my voice here. I've kind of got a cold going on. Now, oppression doesn't have to be from the law. There are many other ways in which one can be oppressed. In fact, the very definition of the word oppression omits legality as a requirement. For one example, a husband can be oppressive towards a wife. So even though there are no laws on the books that oppress minorities, they are still oppressed in other ways, and I will give you a few examples. For one example, black people are unfairly incarcerated more than white people. To quote this actual study, our research suggests that in the federal system, disparities in the post-arrest justice process contribute to this problem. After controlling for the arrest offense, criminal history, and other prior characteristics, sentences for the black male arrestees diverge substantially from those of white male arrestees by about 10% on average. While this disparity does not seem to be growing, it is persistent. And to quote from yet another study, the Commission's updated multivariate regression analysis showed, among other outcomes, that black male offenders have continued to receive longer sentences than similarly situated white male offenders. For example, sentence length for black male offenders exceed sentence length for white male offenders by 19.5% in the Gaul period. This has to account for at least some of the reason for why there are more black people in prison than whites. My favorite statistic to prove that there is discrimination is the statistic that white people and black people smoke the exact same amount of weed, but black people are arrested for it somewhere around 3 to 4 times more. Furthermore, black people are 7 times more likely to be wrongfully convicted of murder, whether it's due to evidence tampering, which happens 20% more often with blacks than it does with whites, or just a racist jury or judges, who knows. Furthermore, things that happened in the past can and do affect things in the present. The ideas from back then still perpetuate, to some extent, today. In fact, Richard Dawkins coined the term meme to mean an idea that spreads from one generation to the next. And not only do ideas from the past affect the present because they never truly go away, the same is true of economic status. In fact, I've heard a lot of Southerners say that the South is still poor because of the Civil War, which there might be some truth to that. As a matter of fact, Nobel Prize-winning economist Milton Friedman even agreed that if one group of people starts off poor and the other starts off rich, several generations down the line, there's still going to be an economic disparity there.
But most of what I've heard you talking about has been about the distribution of income rather than about the distribution of wealth. Yeah. Now, you wouldn't argue, at least I hope you wouldn't, that the person in, let's say India is genetically inferior, say, to the person in America. It's rather through the purely arbitrary circumstance of birth that he's in a country with a less developed economy or in a family that doesn't have as large a share of the capital. And that's not something that he's to blame for.
Oh, I'm not blaming anybody.
Even if the free market system equitably works and everyone progresses an equal amount, that person who started out with a lesser share of the capital is still going to end up with a lesser share of the capital.
That's right.
And there's nothing in the free market system that's going to enable him to make up for what was a purely arbitrary deficit in the first place.
This is the reason we still see the wealth gap between the races as well. It's because black people didn't have nearly as much money to inherit that white people did. And to further add insult to injury on the economic issues facing black people, there is still discrimination in the hiring process. A black person with a clean record has the exact same chances of getting hired as a white person with a felony. And somebody that puts a black name down on a job application is 50% less likely to get called back than somebody that puts a white name down on a job application. And before you start bringing up Asian privilege or whatever, the fact that they are sort of richer than white people is also from discrimination. Yes, this might be counterintuitive, but that doesn't mean shit. Prior to the 1960s, the Asian population in the USA was just 1 million. This is because we actually had laws preventing Asian immigrants from coming here. We had them since the mid to late 1800s, in fact, and they weren't lifted until 1965. Now, there are 20 million Asians in the present, and this is because the discrimination laws were lifted. And that number, however, has only been due to immigration. Now, who exactly can move from Asia to America? Is it the poor, working-class Asians? No. It's the rich Asians, the ones that can afford to actually come here legally and all that. And because it was only the rich folks that could move here, well, rich people are able to send their kids to college, and therefore their kids are able to get better jobs. That's why Asians are doing better off. It'd be like sending all of the white people to Europe and then only letting people that have the resources to move back in. Or sending all the black people to Africa and only letting the black people that have the resources to move back in. You'd have nothing but rich people in this country and nobody to actually produce any of the goods. Yeah.